All right, guys, welcome back. We are now doing note 6-9. So if you're out, make sure you are getting the lesson that you missed. Okay, we're going to be doing a monomial times a polynomial. Now, recall from the notes from yesterday that a monomial just means one thing, and a polynomial means many. So we're taking one thing, and it could be times 1, or times 2, or times 3, or times 4. So 1 times many. So when you're doing this, you need to multiply a monomial and a polynomial. Simply just distribute the monomial to the polynomial. And for exponents, recall the product rule. And the product rule is x to the a times x to the b equals x to the a plus b. So remember, you're just going to multiply coefficients and add exponents. So here you do not have a coefficient. So when you do this, x times x, this just becomes x, and we put squared because there are 2 x's. When I multiply x times 4, I do have a coefficient, so I write that coefficient of 4 first, and then I just keep the x because it has no x's to add to. And then that's my answer. Now, for example 2, this time you do have a coefficient, so you need to be careful here. We're going to do 5 times 3, which is 15. And then I take 3 and add it to 2, which gives me m to the 5th. And then I'm going to take 5 times negative 1, which gives me negative 5. And I take 3 and I add it to 1 to give me m to the 4th. And then I'm going to take 5 and multiply it by negative 7, which is negative 35. And I take m3, and then there are 0 m's, so I have to keep the m3. The m3 can't just disappear. Okay, so as you're working these, I'm going to do the evens with you, and then you have to do the odds. So going over these, if I have 9a times a plus 1, we're going to do 9 times 1, which is 9. And if you have a and a times a, that makes a squared because 1 plus 1 is 2. And then I'm going to do 9 times 1, which is 9. And then I have an a and no a's, so that's a total of 1a. Okay, when I move to example 4, we're going to do 3 times negative 2, which is negative 6. And then a 5 plus a 1 gives me C6. So I add 5 plus 1. And then I do 3 times negative 5, which is negative 15. And I have a C5, and there's no C's here, so 5 plus 0 is 5. For number 6, I do not have a coefficient on this x, so I'm just going to do 1 plus 2, and that gives me x to the 3rd because I don't need to worry about coefficients. And then I'm going to do 1 plus 1, and I have to keep this sign, so negative, and this becomes x squared because 1 plus 1. And then I multiply x times 3, and since I do have a coefficient, I keep the positive 3, and then I add my x's, and there's only one x, so I just bring the x down. Okay, for number 8, let me lift this up just a second. Number 8, I have negative 2x to the 4th times 6x squared minus 12x plus 18. Okay, so multiply coefficients. Negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. And then if I have an x4 and an x2, I add these. 4 plus 2 gives me x to the 6th. Okay, negative 2 times negative 12 is positive 24. If I have an x4 and an x1, 4 plus 1 gives me x to the 5th. And then if I do negative 2 times 18, that gives me negative 36. And if I have x4 and no x's, this is just x to the 4th. All right, for number 10, if I have 3xy times x squared plus xy plus y squared, so now just multiple letters, you have to do this in alphabetical order. Remember that standard form. So we're going to do 3, and this is technically times a 1. Since there's not a coefficient, I just keep the 3. x1 and x2, so 1 plus 2 makes 3, and then I have a y and no other y's, so I just keep the y. You have to go in alphabetical order, so that means you have to do x's first. So then I move to 3 times, again, it's technically a 1, so I'm just going to keep that coefficient of 3. If I have an x1 and an x1, 1 plus 1 is, oh, that's not an x, is x2. And then if I have a y1 and a y1, 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, the last piece says 3 times y squared. Okay, I don't have a coefficient again, so I just keep the plus 3. Now I have to start with my x's. I have an x here, but no x's here, so I keep the x. I have a y1 and a y2, so 1 plus 2 gives me y3. Okay, moving to another alphabetical one, we're going to multiply those coefficients. So 3 times 4 is 12. If I have an A1 and an A2, 1 plus 2 makes 3. If I have a B1 and 0 B's here, I keep the B. Then I do 3 times negative 7, which is negative 21. If I have an A1 and no A's, I keep the A. If I have a B and a B3, I add those. 1 plus 3 gives me B to the 4th. This is written in standard form because the A is the bigger exponent, so you're good to go. Okay, the last example of this style, we're going to multiply those coefficients. So 10 times negative 2 is negative 20. So if I have an M4 and an M1, 4 plus 1 gives me M5. If I have an N1 and an N3, 1 plus 3 gives me 4. And then I'm going to do 10 times 3, which gives me a positive 30. And M4, and then there's no M, so I keep M4. And an N1 and an N1, so 1 plus 1 gives me 2. The bigger M is in the front, so this is in standard form, so we are good to go. We don't have to worry about that. All right, for moving down to the next part, the directions say distribute and then simplify, so that means we're going to have to combine like what we did yesterday. Okay, so then after we combine, you need to make sure you write it in standard form. So since you have parentheses, that means you're distributing. I'm going to take 5 and multiply it by negative 7, which gives me negative 35. And a W1 and a W1 makes W squared. And then I take 5 and multiply it by 3, which gives me 15. I have a W1 and no W, so I keep the W. Now we're distributing negative 2. So negative 2 times 13 is negative 26. I have a W1 and no W, so I keep the W. And then I do negative 2 times negative 9, which gives me a positive 18. And a W1 and a W2 add to give me W3. So now when I write this in standard form, I have to start with my biggest exponent. And the biggest exponent that I see is the 18W3. So I'm going to write that, and then I don't need this piece anymore. The next biggest exponent that I see is this negative 35W but squared, and there's no other squared, so I'm just going to bring that piece down. And then I don't need it anymore. And then I have a 15W and a negative 26W. So when I add those, that gives me a negative 11, and I keep W. Okay, flipping to the back of this page for the rest of the examples, if I can turn the paper. Okay, if I have 18s, it says 6x times 2x minus 3. The first thing I have to do is distribute that 6. Okay, so 6 times 2. This is 12, and then x and x make x squared. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18, and x and no x's make an x. Then I have to distribute negative 5. So negative 5 times 2 is a negative 10, and I have to keep that x squared because there's no x's on the outside. Negative 5 times 9 is negative 45, and I again just keep that x because there's no x's on the outside. And then I do negative 5 times negative 3, which is positive 15. Okay, so now that I have that, I have everything ready to go to combine. I start with my highest exponent. The highest exponent that I see are these x squareds. So 12 and negative 10 will add to give you 2x squared. I don't need those pieces anymore. And then negative 18 and negative 45 will combine because you move to your x's to give you a negative 63x, and then I don't need those two pieces anymore. And then the last thing that you have left is that plus 15, which you can't do anything with. Therefore, this is in standard form. It is complete. You are done with this problem. Okay, for number 20, I'm going to take negative 2 and multiply it by 3, and that gives me negative 6, and I have to keep the m to the third. And then I take negative 2 and I multiply it by 6, and that gives me negative 12. Then I multiply over here. I have 3 times 2m, and that gives me 6, and I have to add my m, so that gives me m to the third. And then 3 times 3, which gives me 9. And I add my m's, which gives me m squared. And then I do 3 times 1, which gives me a 3, and I just keep my m. Give me 1 second, guys. Somebody's at my door.